All right, we have Gerard Friedman here. And Gerard, I don't know if we formally met in person. I don't know if I've met anybody in person in the last year, but certainly we may have crossed paths. But I do know that we have some mutual friends and some people that are, pretty close to me and as well. So, and share common beliefs because we pretty much organize ourselves around people who share the same thoughts as us. And you kind of connected with me, and we were discussing some of these commonalities amongst us. And when I started this podcast, I really wanted just to talk about people's stories around how they developed themselves or who helped develop them into who they are now. And so where I usually start is, what are you doing right now, Gerard? I know by profession you have an athletic training background, but tell
Mhm.
me what you're doing now, and then let's take a step back and go, how did you get here?
Well, I will say that we did meet briefly. I was at one of your seminars at Drive 495 in Manhattan.
That's right.
One
That's
that
right.
you did, yeah, with I think Ben House and Pat Davidson. So yeah, we didn't really get to speak much. There's a lot of people there looking to talk to you, but we did meet. We did
Yeah,
have
I
a
I
quick chat.
I knew that. I knew that intuitively, and it was probably a big, sweaty, crowded room. So maybe that's
Oh yeah,
erased
oh
from my
yeah.
memory. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't blame you. No, not at all. Uh, so yeah, I am a certified athletic trainer, like many of the other guests that have been on the show. I work full time currently at a high school in New Jersey, working with the student athletes there, all the sports. I am the sole athletic trainer, so every student athlete is my responsibility ultimately. And I do a lot of administrative work, but ultimately my main job there is to manage, treat, rehabilitate, and then prevent athletic injuries.
and
It,
and does
Mhm.
that sort of carry over into the physical preparation and strength and conditioning as well?
Absolutely, especially the preventative side, uh, because I also am a personal trainer, and I also work with our athletic teams in the preseason, the postseason, and actually even during in season in the weight room. So a lot of the kids that don't get hurt, I'm in charge of them as well. And if I wasn't, it would be up to a coach to figure it out. So I think I'm a little better suited in that category. And yeah, a lot of the work transfers over tremendously because they're all, the way I see, rehabilitation is, we have these principles of movement and biomechanically how things should look, how things should feel, how things should flow. And I look to apply those same principles to a rehabilitation client just as much I would working with a Gen Pop client at my gym or with the teams that I have in the weight room. So there's tons of carryover.
And how have things been the past year for you in terms of COVID and everything?
Different. We are no longer in the weight room. So we are in school full time. New Jersey does have high school athletics going on. So we had all of our seasons so far leading up to the spring. There have been some breaks here and there because teams have had to quarantine. For example, the boys basketball team was off for 2 weeks because they were exposed. But so like with something like that, I put together programs for people to do on their own at home. And I send it out to the coaches and they send it out to their players and they could always contact me if need be with any questions. And in addition to that, we've taken everything that we do preseason in the weight room and have kind of just brought it out onto the field. Luckily, I have a fully equipped weight room right next to my football and track field. So, some of the exercises, had to go. We weren't bench pressing, anything like that, which I'm all right with because I'm not the biggest fan of bench presses for athletes. But the kids love them, so you got to do them. So we had to be a little creative, a little imaginative. There was also the fact that we had to distance, so we had to use our space wisely. And we just had to kind of think on our feet a little bit, and still we were still able to do a good job. The preparation aspect was a lot shorter, unfortunately, and we saw some injuries because of that. I believe, I think there's a big factor there. But we were able to kind of do a good job there, and we took a little bit of a different perspective with the seasons. It wasn't about winning championships per se this year. It was more about getting the kids outside in the sun getting them to move and sweat and interact with each other in a safe and reasonable manner, but still to like be with each other, which is crucial for kids and their development. And we just wanted them to be healthy and to be able to work on, use exercise as a modality to improve their health and prevent, hopefully getting sick. So that was kind of the perspective. So it took a lot of pressure off of the coaches to get wins, and that change of perspective, and that reduction in pressure allowed for a little bit of an easier going environment, where in the past, a lot of times the only kids in the weight room or on the field working out would be the football team. And because there is kind of a different perspective there and a little less, intensity from, everybody's working hard. The work ethic doesn't change, but like the intensity it just has a different feel. I don't really know how else to describe it. And we actually got more kids because of it. Maybe it was because their parents wanted them out there more often. I'm sure there are a lot of different factors. But it was great. We were able to do some good work and prepare some kids for some higher level competition in the future, and also establish some habits and routines that they can do on their own and take with them into college and later on in life. And they understand the importance of that a lot more, because there's this big thing looming over our heads that could ultimately kill us, and people seem to take it a lot more seriously now when I talk to them about sleep and nutrition and stress management. And there's good examples that we can use of things going on right now and apply those examples. And people are able to, the kids are able to kind of see that this is their life too. It's not just adults talking about adult things, that all this stuff impacts them. So they take it a little more seriously and are able to apply that in their life a little more frequently.
So you think there's some positives from this whole experience that you can kind of take forward?
Absolutely. I always try to look for some positives and kind of move forward with the things that we can do instead of dwell on the things that we're limited to.
Yeah.
And look at it from a perspective as like, hey, we're all here. We're breathing. We're happy. We have our bodies. We can use our bodies. Like, let's not take that for granted, because we see what's going on around us, and we
Yeah.
see how people have been negatively impacted. So let's be grateful for what we have, grateful for each other, and keep that in mind as we move forward with the activities that we're doing.
Now, if we go back in, how this all started, obviously it sounds like you got a lot on your plate. You're covering a lot of different areas, and maybe, some of it is injury prevention, but I mean, you're covering everything from nutrition, sleep, recovery, mental health, probably as well, right?
Yeah.
Um, so when you got started, when you were in university, what did you want to do? You know,
I actually got into athletic training just by chance. I went to college for baseball. Yeah, I wanted to go to a school where I could play, and I got recruited by this school. I got recruited by a few schools, one of which I had a full ride to. Unfortunately, the school didn't have any majors that I was particularly interested in, so I didn't end up going because I knew I wasn't going to go pro or anything like that. So I had to have a career, and that coach actually referred me over to the school that I ended up attending. And I was looking at the majors, and I knew I wanted to be involved in sports in some way, shape, or form. Not the business side, but the actual sports side of it. And they had physical education and this other thing called athletic training. And certainly nothing wrong with phys ed, but I knew I didn't want to do that. So I don't even know if I even read the description of the program. I was like, oh, I'll just do this athletic training thing. I know that we work with football players, we work with all the other sports. I'm on the sideline, I'm involved. I can contribute to the success of a program, and be part of the team and like make this my career. So it sounded pretty good. And I started getting into it and learning more about it and seeing what was involved. And I liked it. I really enjoy the pressure environment, which is why I like working football so much. And I kind of thrive under that. And it's a good rush. And that's what kind of hooked me right off the bat. And from there, yeah, it just it grew into, my practice now is very, very different than what it was when I first started out, like night and day. But the way it started out was, yeah, with football right off the bat. In the fall, I got thrown right into it. We start internship immediately. And the love of football and the love of working with different athletes and being on the field and, seeing some great athletic performances kind of got me hooked right away. And I wanted to work with those people and help them and be just, a part of something bigger.
That's interesting because a lot of people I've talked to have talked about that part of it, not necessarily like going to class and learning. It's the hands-on, like working with the athletes as part of that process or that program, and that's what heavily influenced them is that hands-on. Would you agree?
Mm, yeah, absolutely. I'm not a big book guy. I am now, but in college, I could care less about that stuff. I just wanted to get by with the grades, um, which wasn't the best perspective, but it worked out. But it was really like the interactions with people, and it's really gratifying to take an athlete, and you've done this as well, who is just off the field and can't return the sport, and mentally, is starting to lose it a little bit because he or she is watching all their friends and like go out and play and have fun and do the things that they want to do. And to take that person from point A to point Z, where they're back on the field and they're crushing it and like they're scoring the winning goal, or they're throwing the winning touchdown. It's you're not out there doing it, but you contributed heavily to that, and you form a good bond with those people because you probably see them more than anybody else. They spend the most time in the training room, and yeah, it's the human aspect really that got to me. I love working with people. I love teaching and figuring out problems and problem solving. And if you can come up with a solution and it works for somebody and they're grateful to you for that, it's just a really great feeling.
Yeah, and I assume you talk about relationships. There were individuals that you met in college, mentors or whoever they may be, people you work with. Were there some key
Mhm.
people that influenced you?
Sure, absolutely. The I went to state school in New Jersey called Montclair State University. The head athletic trainer there is actually in the Athletic Training Hall of Fame. Very well known, really great at his job, and like just a great person in general, great human, and is a great communicator and really forms bonds with people and kind of takes people under their wing. His name was John Davis. And because of him, like I just felt encouraged to constantly, volunteer for different things. Hey, we need basketball coverage tonight. We need
Yep.
volleyball coverage. We need somebody at the soccer game. And the more and more I would volunteer for different things, and a lot of other students did not, the more I spent time with him. And the time that I spent with him on the sideline, away from the classroom, where it was just us, he would use that opportunity to talk about different things and to teach me different stuff, and then like grab like a freshman who wasn't doing anything and say, hey, get over here, you're going to be our guinea pig. So that time was really important, to just my development. And what that did was I kind of earned his trust. So when later on in college, as I got to my senior year, and we started going to different clinical sites for internships, I would just tell him like, hey, like we had an affiliation with the New York Giants. And I would say, I'm getting the Giants job next year. And he was like, you are 100%. You're right. You earned it. Like that's what's going to happen. And I think putting myself out there and spending the time with him and proving to him that I had the work ethic and I was hungry enough to get it, kind of rewarded me in that aspect. And once I got to the Giants, I was my clinical instructor, the guy who I was attached to the hip over there, was Steve Kennelly, who I know that you have a relationship with. And it's very, very similar. I stuck with Steve as much as I could. I learned as much as he's a wealth of knowledge, really great at his job. And the Giants have a bunch of great trainers. I mean, Ronnie Barnes is also a legend. And but Steve was my guy. And very similar situation with him than it was with John. I volunteered for as much as I possibly could. I stayed there as long as I possibly could, even after the internship was over and it was time for me to move on. I wasn't going anywhere. They had to actually kick me out because they just didn't have any more desk room at that point. They had just hired a full-time guy. So those were like in college, those were my two big mentors. And I basically tried to emulate them. And when I went off on my own after college, I got a full-time job at a different high school. And I basically took everything from pro sports and from that collegiate level and brought it to the high school field. and try to operate in ways that they would. And I would say to myself, what would John do in this situation? What would Steve say? Would he say anything at all? And most of the time, like that's how I would kind of form my opinions and move forward from there with my
Yeah,
answers.
it's great to always hear about, like, a lot of people go back to the New York Giants and that organization and the professionalism,
Mm-hmm.
and the people. And so, yeah, obviously Steve is a great guy, super professional. Same with Ronnie.
Mm-hmm.
And I always get, great stories about things that happen. And I'm good friends with Jerry Palmieri too, and the strength
Mm-hmm.
side.
Yep,
So,
yep.
it's nice to hear that. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
nice to hear that you're taking stuff forward from that experience. And you also mentioned, Pat Davidson had an influence on you at some point. And I always love my Pat Davidson stories. So we're gonna see
I
what
mean,
extent.
who has he not influenced? He's just that guy. I left my first training job in high school, and I went to grad school in Brooklyn College. And at that time, Pat Davidson was a professor in Brooklyn College. Lucky me. And I had him for some class. I don't remember what it was, but we spent one day in the classroom, and he was like, "I'm supposed to teach you guys this book, but I don't like it, so we're not going to do it." And this probably contributed him to being asked to leave, but all works out for the better. And he was like, "From here on out, meet me in the basement." We called it the dungeon. There was this like dusty weight room down in the basement of the building where we were at, but like it had everything we needed. And I'm a big exercise guy. Throughout high school, my dad worked out, so I would always meet him at the gym. But we would do traditional bodybuilding stuff, buys and back, and another day is chest and tries, and then abs and legs. And Pat really, I had never like deadlifted before. I had never front squatted. I just used the leg press machine, and that's just what I knew. And Pat kind of opened up a whole world of exercise for me. And this was our class. Like this is what I was getting college credit for, which is like I couldn't have like you can't think of a better education from that standpoint.
Yeah, that's
Like
how it
this
should
is
be.
movement 101. And like if Pat looked back at the stuff that we were doing back then, he would probably cringe. We were like foam rolling a quad, stretching a quad, foam rolling a back, stretching a hamstring, and stuff that I don't do anymore, stuff that Pat doesn't do anymore. But it opened me up to all these different modalities. And it's like, hey, weight training just doesn't have to be the cable rack. It doesn't have to be the leg press machine. It is so much more than that. And this is actually a way that we can, use the weight room to improve athletic performance, because buys and tries probably isn't going to make that happen. And when Pat left, or I don't know if he left before I did, but I graduated, and also just like his style of talking and teaching is just extremely different and atypical, and like really like he's a blue collar guy. I'm a blue collar guy. We really just kind of hit it off. I was also, in the class with a lot of physical therapy students from India. It was like some sort of program that they had, and I was probably the strongest guy in the class, which isn't saying a lot. So Pat chose me often to demonstrate different things, and like I felt kind of close to the guy, and I never let go of him ever since. I've been he's a good friend, and I've been following him around social media, and I see him every once in a while at different events, and he's just every step along the way, the progress he's made, I've always tried to keep up with. And if Pat is teaching something, that means it's important. That means I should know what he's got to say. And he might turn around a year later and say, that's not really all that accurate, or that's not very, very useful. And good, I want to hear that too. And just, the more that I can learn from him, and the more, I can follow his work, the better professional it's going to make me, because I can then apply that stuff and see if that is working for me and the people that I work with.
Yeah, he's a good source of information, but also he's good at vetting stuff. So, like, if you adopt his approach, you're going to have that same sort of eye to like
Hmm.
look at things and go, okay, is this
Yeah.
really working? And then obviously he tries everything out on himself, right? So,
Absolutely. I mean, that was a big principle that I took away from him. Is I do a lot of personal training as well, and I do a lot of program design writing. And if I haven't done an exercise or like a protocol of that exercise, I don't really know how it feels. I don't know how the person who's doing it is going to react. I don't really know how many reps and sets to program, what the rest time should be. And Pat was like, if you're going to write something down and make somebody do it, you better freaking do it yourself,
Yeah.
because you're not going to be a good coach to that person if you have no idea what they're going through. So if they're going to suffer, you have to suffer first. And that's a takeaway that I think probably, transcends disciplines.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, there's not many people in formal education who take that approach, right? So it's refreshing, and you're right. Being engaging, in his way is very, very, very effective. And did you ever see the movie Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield?
Yes, I have
Yeah, the
actually.
the Sam
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Kinison. He would remind me of the Sam Kinison, the history teacher, screaming at people. But yeah, that's I always think of that scene and going, "Yep, that's probably how it was." So
It was all out of love, though. All out
yeah,
of love. He was screaming 10 more seconds. That's all.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
So you've had these educational experiences and the practical experience, particularly working in a college environment. And then what were some of the first jobs that you had coming out of school? And did you find that going out of school, like, you were prepared, or that you had to start looking at other sources of education as part of your professional development?
I would say that if it wasn't for the practical experience that we got in college, the internships that we had to do every semester, that I probably would not have been prepared. The theoretical stuff is obviously important. You have to know the science behind what you're doing, but you also have to be able to coach it, and you have to be able to communicate with people. You have to recognize when something isn't going right, and realize when something is that maybe we should continue with and do more of. And I would say really the internships are what prepared me, and I was well prepared because of that, especially coming from the Giants. And I actually had, before the Giants, an internship that I got on my own with the Jets. And the combination of the collegiate and the pro level really had me prepared to train at the high school level, which is where I got a full-time job. So 100% was prepared. Again, it looks a lot different than it did today, but I'd say that I did a fairly good job right out of college.
Well, that's good to hear, because I think a lot of people think, well, I did my internship with this pro team and that pro team, or this Division 1 school, and that's where I want to work. But you can turn around and you can become a very good coach for kids, work at the high school level, work with general population. And I think a lot of people don't, necessarily equate the two. Like, okay, I'm working
Mhm.
with high performance athletes. How's that going to help me work with, somebody who's middle aged and might have some back problems and all that. So I think that's really interesting that you kind of took that and you kind of ran with it with, this high school population. And then from there, what were your sources of continuing education as you started work? Because we all get to that point where we're like, okay, we're working, and you're like, okay, well, how do I want to develop myself further? What sources
Mhm.
did you look for?
Well, I didn't really have any until I left that job and went to grad school.
Okay.
And Pat was my source in grad school. And when I wanted to start learning about nutrition, I would just say to Pat, like, "Hey, like, who should I look towards?" And he'd be like, "Oh, go check out Rob Wolf." And then from Rob Wolf, I would learn about Chris Kresser. And then from him, I would learn about Mark Hyman, and that kind of snowballed. And then I wanted to learn more about biomechanics. I needed to be better at my job as a therapist. So I would say to Pat, like, "Hey, like, what's a good model to learn here? How do I get better at this?" And he started getting into PRI at that point. So he was like, "Go to a couple of these courses, learn as much as you can, and then start practicing it tomorrow on the kids that you're working with." And then from PRI, when you go to these courses, back when we can go to things, you would meet all these great therapists and athletic trainers, and maybe even students that were in physical therapy school, who were great sources themselves. And you connect with these people, you form a bond and a relationship, and ultimately, like, you're able. It's just like degrees of separation. You're able to learn about new people through them. So from PRI, for example, I was able to learn about one of my mentors, Zach Couples, who does a great job of explaining movement, breaking down how we can use movement principles to impact pain, reduce pain, and improve movement capabilities. So I started working with Zach. Um, Also from Pat, I learned about Ben House, And then I went to one of Ben House's retreats and I met Kyle Dobbs. And I started working with Kyle Dobbs as a mentor from a business development standpoint. So I think really just putting myself out there and like kind of going into some uncomfortable conversations and making some friends and, forming a relationship is really what got me to that point where like I now have this community of people where like we know like 100 of the same people and we have all those mutual friends. And that was kind of my starting point, and it all kind of goes back to Pat as usual. But yeah, just kind of branching off from there and meeting different people along the way and learning about their experience and their viewpoint got me to other sources that I can learn from.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's certain individuals that are catalysts for, networking and creating collaboration. So if you can get in with people who are constantly looking for new people to learn from, and and also there's like a trust factor. So if Pat or any, somebody you trust says, yes, you should go study this or you should go learn from this person, it does make it a lot easier for you to make that dive and take that step. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And you have to earn that trust, of course. But just putting yourself out there and having a little bit of work ethic usually does the job.
Yeah, yeah. So I know we talked a bit offline about, where you're taking things now, and there's this multifaceted approach that you use. But one of the things that we talked about was you're working on communication skill, and, not only modifying behavior, getting people to do what you want them to do, but doing it in a way that, gets people on board and builds that trust. What are some of the things that you're looking at right now in terms of taking that and sharing it with others so that they have better communication skills around the way they coach and the way they do
Mhm.
rehab? What are some of the things that are at the top of your mind right now?
So, I mean, when talking about communication, I look at it from kind of two different standpoints. One is the exercise part of it, the cueing, the environment that you create, and the other is the lifestyle coaching that you mentioned briefly. So, helping people figure out and actually do some of the habits and routines that align with their goals that they can kind of identify with and do for the rest of their life. So, from the exercise portion. I learned a ton from my man Zach Couples, and from him and offshoot into Bill Hartman as well.
Hmm.
And utilizing your external cues as well as your internal, I think are just as important, and maybe external even easier when working one on Zoom with people. If I can just say like, hey, push your knee towards that wall in front of you, and also when working with kids, because they're kind of scatterbrained. And there's a lot of kids in the training room at the same time, and there's some music playing, and it's a little bit of a chaotic environment, which is great. I kind of like it. It's the exact opposite of the classroom, which they sort of need that variability. So, kind of learning the cueing system and utilizing your environment in order to do that came from my man Zach for sure. He was a great help in that regard. Uh, the health coaching aspect of it was something that I learned pretty quickly that I was bad at. I
How
so
so? I want to hear about that.
it started a while back. I've been personal training ever since I was in college. I was like, hey, I'm in this program. It's about rehabilitation. I could definitely train some 50-year-old mom and help her like get more fit. So I started doing that when I was like 18, 19. And a few years down the line, I was training full time. And my clients were getting stronger, but they weren't like everybody, at least in New York, comes for weight loss for the most part. And I wasn't really helping people lose weight. And it wasn't because the training sessions that I was doing weren't that great. It's because they would train with me, I don't know, between 2 and 4 times a week. And then they would leave and engage in all the habits and routines that got them overweight to begin with. So I started health coaching very informally. I didn't know what it was called. I was just like, hey, let's like go down to the gym office. Let's have a conversation about sleep and nutrition and non-exercise activity and stress management. And I read all these books about it. And it was like, this is what you guys need to do. You got to sleep more. You got to walk more. You should eat this style of food. And I basically just shared information and gave them advice. And it got nobody was successful with it. Some of the people were able to implement it into their lifestyle, but it was very short lived. And others just like, it was kind of a blank stare. The hour was over and they just go right back to what they did. And I did that for a couple of years actually, and wasted a lot of people's time and money. And eventually I got kind of frustrated because I was like reading these books. I wanted to help people. I wanted them to reach their goals. That's why they were seeing me. I wanted to be successful and I wanted them to be successful. So I kind of knew I had to change my approach and just didn't really know what that was. So I enrolled in a health coaching program and learned pretty quickly what I was doing wrong. And I was basically taking the expert approach where I would just give information, I would give them advice, and that type of, that route usually doesn't lead to long-term change. And I learned pretty quickly that if I changed my approach and put the client in the driver's seat and let them lead the conversation and ask them some powerful questions and respond with some good reflections and affirmations, that people kind of know what they need to do. And when we're figuring out a realistic and individualized plan as to how they're going to do it, who better than that person than to figure out what that plan should be? Because they're going to know what's realistic. They're going to know, yeah, I'm probably not going to do that thing there. Um, they're going to know what their resources are, their experiences. And I would have to be a mind reader in order to make all those perfect recommendations to them. So when I changed my approach and kind of used this client-centered approach, it took a lot of pressure off me, one, for having to have the right answer for those people. And it kind of flipped the script a little bit and put the onus on them. And when I was able to kind of help people come to certain realizations and enlightenments as to, what they know they need to do and a realistic and sustainable way for them to do it, and they kind of convince themselves instead of me trying to convince them, it was so much more successful and the outcomes were so much better. And I actually help people in ways that like they're still doing years later. It's just kind of become part of their life, part of their identity. And there are a number of different books that have helped me do that, all of which I learned through this health coaching program. So there's a coaching psychology manual, which was tremendous help. Also, there's a system called motivational interviewing. Specifically, there's even one for nutrition and fitness. And finally, there is also a model called the trans-theoretical model of change, which talks about different stages of change that a client might be in, whether they're just thinking about it, or they're preparing, or they're ready to go, and how we can communicate differently with those people so that we can move them along those stages of change to the point where they are maintaining that new activity for over half a year and hopefully for the rest of their life. So utilizing those different approaches has really changed the way that I can, help people with their goals that don't involve the gym, but also help them reach their goals that they came to me for that are in the gym. And that's really been a game changer for me. A lot of times, trainers just like myself go into it thinking they know how to do it, even though none of us have ever taken a communication course in our entire life. And we would never do that for training. We go to every workshop and read every book that we possibly can, but we don't think about it when it comes to, conversations. And I had to learn that the hard way, but sometimes it's the best way to learn.
Yeah, like it's very interesting that you say that information is not the problem. Because I remember talking to somebody else and they said we all know what we should be doing. Like we should be a good husband, a good parent. We should eat properly. We should get to bed on time. We should, not stay in front of the computer or on your phone too much. But it's really hard to do that stuff. Um, and the other part of it was that once you start getting into a good habit, it's actually easier as the further along you get. So, whether it's an eating habit or something like that, and then it becomes the norm. And so how do you get people to that point where they do get, you've motivated them to get into those habit forming, behaviors, which a good habit forming behaviors, because as we know, we could have bad habits and,
Mhm.
eat snacks right before bed or whatever it is. So what are some examples of you convincing people to do the right behaviors as opposed to just saying, here's a diet, just do this.
Yeah. Well, I don't try to convince anybody. If somebody's going to be arguing for change, it's going to be the client, not me. Because I learned, back in the day that, if you try to tell somebody what to do, they're probably going to do the exact opposite just out of spite, or they're going to come up with reasons why maybe that's not the best thing for them right now. Or like, I don't see myself doing that. And it's uncomfortable. It creates some discord, and it sort of like ruins the relationship, and a good relationship and trust is what coaching is all about. So I try to just ask powerful questions and help people come to the right realizations. Mostly like when we're talking about motivation, I want it to be internal. I want them to figure out the reasons why they want to do something, their desires, their needs, their commitment to it, and the things that they can do to start actually making that a habit. I also use the habit system, the habit loop system. James Clear wrote a great book called Atomic Habits, which I utilize all the time.
Hmm.
And finally, I want to know what that person's needs are, and I want to know how that relates to the bad habit that they're trying to break. So, for example, like you brought up, eating foods that we know we shouldn't eat. I want, like, if I have a client that is like eating comfort food, that's kind of a need right there that sends out a red flag. It's like, well, what do you need comfort from? Why do you need comfort? It's like, oh, you got a really stressed out job. Like, there's a root cause right there, and that person is now using food as a strategy to relieve their stress. So it's not really a food problem, it's a stress problem. And I could say, like, hey, make better food choices. Instead of, having that piece of pie, have these vegetables instead. I mean, for anybody who stress eats, vegetables ain't going to help. So making that superficial recommendation is not really going to lead to any long-term results. We're not addressing that person's needs. We're not helping them come up with any stress relief activities. So I really want to know what their needs are, because if we do, now we have a root cause of a problem, and we can now come up with ways to address that and skirt around, like, okay, you're using food as your solution. Let's find other solutions that maybe don't involve food, that are going to help you reduce your stress. And now we don't have to like think about like what other nutritional strategies we need to accomplish, because that we're getting to that person's need, we're accomplishing that. They're no longer stressed, so they're no longer reaching for that comfort food, and they can, eat like a normal healthy adult. So I think, like, really the needs there, and figuring out the root cause of people's problems, and the root cause behind their actions, are going to help us come up with better solutions to those actions.
Like the first thing that jumps out, where do you draw the line? Like, do you actually get into conversations about, hey, your job is creating a stress. Maybe you should go into another job, or maybe, you should seek marriage counseling, or, I mean, do you ever get to that point, or are you being very careful to know the scope of your work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not a therapist. If there were ever any red flags, or I was starting to kind of creep towards that line where I was getting out of my scope, I would look to make a referral. Uh, but I can also sort of avoid crossing that line by just asking about it. Yeah, I'm not going to be the one making recommendations unless the person wants me to. If they, literally ask me, hey, what do you think I should do here? That's a different story. But if I think that somebody's job is the root cause of it, and we sort of kind of got to that, I might just ask them, what do you think about that? What are your thoughts on your job being the driver of these bad activities? Like, what do you think we can do here? What is the most realistic way to proceed? Because if I tell somebody that they should leave their job, I mean, they could take great offense to that, and I just kind of took a step back in our relationship, and I'm giving them advice on something that I don't know really much about. I know these clients. We have a superficial relationship. I don't know the details of their life though. And I feel like it would be out of line for me to make recommendations that bold, and could potentially backfire really hard. So I just want to ask the questions that get them thinking about it. And if they can come to those conclusions on their own, it's going to be way more powerful than if I just say it to them themselves.
Yeah, and then the first thing I was thinking too was, well, you've developed this skill set now. How have you kind of funneled that back into the work you're doing with high school kids?
Mm,
Because that's a totally different animal. I have teenagers,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So I'm trying to be a psychology expert and I'm failing miserably. But
Yeah, I mean, if you tell your teenagers what to do, are they going to do it?
oh no, it's yeah,
Probably not. Right? I
no.
mean, unless it's something fun, like, hey, let's go play some basketball. Like they're down for that. But it's very much the same. You know, I use that kind of client centered approach. I put them in the driver's seat and try to honor their autonomy, and make sure that we're not like going into any red flag areas. There's a lot to do with mental health in high school, especially now with social media and COVID. So I do work with child study team that we have in our school, where we have trained professionals for that. But I try to give them options and let them decide what they want. I don't know if you know Gretchen Rubin, but she has a great model of different kind of characteristic types. And I just assume that every athlete that I'm working with in the high school is a rebel, and they're going to do the exact opposite of what I say. So instead of me telling them what to do, I'll give them choices,
Mm.
and we'll figure out what those choices are, what they're interested in, what they're kind of feel motivated to work on, and then we'll focus in on one of them, and I'll see like, hey, what do you want to do with this? What do you think is the most realistic way for you to proceed? Tell me how you're going to quantify this thing. How do we know if it's working? How do you know if you're getting better? And I just try to be a question asker, really. And there's going to be a point in time where not everybody has the answer. You know, there's going to be some knowledge gaps there, and that's where I can kind of step in and fill in those knowledge gaps. So if somebody is saying like, "Hey, yeah, I'm just tired all the time, and like I don't know what to do here," it's like, "Well, tell me what you know about sleep." And if they don't have an answer to that, like I'm here to fill that in.
Yeah, I could see this being very useful, obviously at you know the high school level for parenting, but um, at the college level, sometimes I think it can be very regimented. Like you know you can tell people what to do and they just do it because they're part of that system. They feel like okay, but then now you get people transitioning to professional sports and they're like, well, I'm independent now, I'm a professional, this is my career. And then I find talk to people who've moved from college to pro, and they're like, wow, it's harder to work with these pro athletes because they just want to do what they want to do and they don't really care about my authority, or they don't respect me. And so
Hmm.
what advice would you give to those type of professionals who are now working with these slightly enabled and empowered, pro athletes who may not, again, just respond to information. You have to
Hmm.
build some trust. What are your thoughts there?
I have worked with a few pro athletes before, and they 100% walk into the gym and say, "We're going to do this today." I'm like, "Oh, okay, I had this program, but I'll get rid of that." So yeah, it's true. They know what they want to do. I want them to justify it. So I want them to explain what they know about that topic. Why this? What's good about this for you? Why do you, 250-pound lineman, want to become a vegan?
Yeah.
So and like justify that to me. Tell me what you know. Give me all the information you have. Let's make sure you have all the information you can to succeed, and tell me why this is the right choice for you. And
Yeah.
now tell me what your plan is to do this right. Because like, if you want to be a vegan, I want to help you be the best vegan you possibly can. It's not my job to change your mind, because if you try, they're just going to find somebody else that agrees with them and is kind of a yes man. So I would say like, yeah, dig a little deeper, ask them what they know about it, ask them for all the information they have, the experience, the knowledge, and why this is the right thing for them. And they might not have the answer. A lot of times, like I work with Gen Pop people, and they come and they tell me they want macros, and I ask them, why macros, and they said, well, my friend does it. I'm like, okay, well, tell me what you know about that, and what it involves. And then we get to talking about what you have to do with macros, and they realize, this isn't for me. I'm not going to do macros. This is a bad idea. I'm like, good. I'm glad I asked. So really getting people to justify their decisions, I think, is a big one. And a lot of times we'd be pretty surprised how people make these decisions on a whim, and don't really have much reasoning or knowledge behind it.
Yeah, it's mostly emotion, right?
Yeah, or they
Yeah.
saw somebody else do it, or it was recommended by a friend, and they just think it's right for them,
Yeah,
which it
because
might be.
it
But we got to figure that out.
we got to discuss it. Yeah, and I think that seems to be a common theme with what you're saying here is this idea of a collaborative relationship rather than whether it's you working with Pat Davidson in a college environment, or whether it's you working with a client or a pro athlete, if you don't get to that point of having a collaborative relationship, then it becomes a little more, oppositional,
Hmm.
one way, transactional, whatever you want to call it. So is that what you've generally found? Is that's the best solution in most cases?
In my experiences, yes, absolutely. It allows you to have a conversation without any what's a good word for it. It allows you to have a conversation without like butting heads. Um,
Adversarial. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And like, yeah, we're working together now because we are part of a team, and like you're going to value my presence because like I'm asking you these questions. We're getting deeper past the surface, and if we ask the right questions, respond with the right reflections, the clients usually feel kind of enlightened afterwards, as well as empowered. And you leave that conversation feeling pretty good, and you want more of it, and you're ready to go get it also. So it's motivating for that person as well, and it's just going to help you form a better bond and a better relationship. And I mean, that's what the coaching is all about.
Yeah, and it sounds very common sense, very easy, and as you and I know, it's not. It's a
It's
process.
not. Yeah.
Um, so how, obviously we're going to give people your contact info, but what's your recommendation to people if they want to explore this area a
Mhm.
bit more as part of their profession?
Well, in an attempt to get better at this myself, I always thought like it's the best way. The way you really start to understand and get better at things is when you teach it. And you don't have to wait, in my opinion, to be an expert to teach something. If you have a foundational grasp on something that other people don't, like, let me teach you the foundation. So I actually started with a group of personal trainers where we would meet once a week for about 2 hours and talk about these concepts and then practice them. Like break out in the practice rooms and practice it. Um, I've since teamed up with another health coach, and we made a 6-week home study program that we can probably link to if need be. And I think that's a really good place to start because we kind of take four of the major books that talk about these concepts and models and consolidated them and gave just the foundation of them, the bare basics. And for somebody starting out who might be interested but isn't sure, that's a really good starting point because it kind of consolidates everything. It gives you the skills that you need. But from there, like you have to practice it because asking open-ended questions, responding with reflections and affirmations, just not part of our day-to-day. So like learning this stuff and then working with like maybe a client under the assumption or under like knowing with the client knowing that you are practicing this isn't the thing that you're good at. Maybe they're not paying top dollar, maybe they're not paying at all, and just making the mistakes and learning from those mistakes, I think, is the best way to start. And I don't think people need to wait to get started. I think like you should start right now. And if you can even do so under the guise of a professional like myself or another health coach, where you have a mentor who is able to kind of point out those mistakes that you made and tell you what you can do better there and reiterate on that and make improvements yourself. I mean, it all comes back to mentorship. And I think that's really the best way to learn about this stuff and get better.
Yeah, and how do people get in touch with you or just get more information from what you're doing through social media?
You can always send me a DM. Happy to talk. My Instagram is bellhouse_fitness_. And I also have a website, bellhousefitness.com. And yeah, I mean, that would be probably the best way to kind of get directed to where that program is. It's hosted by Kyle at Compound Performance. So if you know him, you can also go to his site and check that out.
Yeah, Kyle Dobbs. Um,
Hmm.
and it seems like it's something that you can't you're going to obviously take that dive and start learning, but it seems like something you have to just ongoing maintenance is important too, and keep
Hmm.
working on these skills just like any training
Hmm.
activity or any physical activity. You have to work on this
Absolutely.
constantly.
Hmm. And yeah, and if you're working with people on a daily basis, if you're a busy trainer, you have the opportunity. People hire trainers to help them reach their goals, and more than likely, that goal is weight loss. And exercise is only one part of that complex puzzle there. So if you aren't speaking to them about the things that they do when they leave the gym, then we're missing a really big piece of the puzzle there. And like there's going to be people like I'm sure if like I told Pat to do this, he'd probably tell me to go F myself because he's there to train, you know, and he doesn't want to do that stuff, which is fine. But recognize like if you are not going to be doing that stuff, clients need it. You know, they need to kind of establish some routines and habits that are going to align with their goals, or else they're probably going to fail in their goal of weight loss, which also just they're probably going to blame the trainer for on top of. So if you aren't going to have these conversations, at least make the referral so that we have kind of a team working with this client, and we're all supporting each other. You know, the health coach is not going to steal a client from a trainer. They're two completely different jobs. But what the health coach is going to be talking about with that client is going to directly impact that trainer's ability to help that client lose weight with exercise, for example. So like, yeah, let's either get really good at this ourselves, or let's make that referral if it's just not something that you're interested in.
Yeah, it sounds like the health coach is kind of a bridge between maybe a physical trainer and maybe a healthcare provider, where
Hmm.
maybe somebody feels like, well, I don't need to go see somebody medical, or I don't need to see a psychotherapist yet. Maybe there's some, concern about just taking that sort of leap. But, like you said, you are a bit of a bridge. You can be a referrer as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for doing this, Gerard. I'm very interested, and I'm always looking to improve myself. So maybe I'll get in touch with you. And
Check out the course.
yeah, yeah. And I know a lot of professionals who, maybe they don't want to admit it, but they may need help in this area. And I think once they make that leap, they'll probably be a lot better for it.
For sure, for sure. I mean, once we start getting into this and seeing like what goes into it, I think it's pretty obvious that we need to spend some time on this stuff and practice it and get better, because it's just a completely different world.
Yeah, yeah. And you can work on it every day, right?
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, hundred
Awesome.
percent.
Well,
Yep.
thanks for doing this, and we'll be in touch very soon. I want to do a follow up with you at some point and just see how things are going, especially once we get out of COVID and hopefully we get back to normal and do some in person stuff.
All right. Well, thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Great. Take care.
Have a good one.